Hey friends, and welcome to the Happy Hour with Jamie Ivey podcast. I'm your host, Jamie, and I'm so glad you're here. Each week on this show, I invite a girlfriend to join me and we chat about the big things in life, the little things in life, and everything in between. Happy last day of January of 2020, you guys. It's a new decade. We know that. I thought it'd be fun to talk to a few friends about what life was like for them 10 years ago, how life has changed, what the year 2010 brought them, what the last decade has brought them, and what they hope for over the next 10 years. Today, I'm sitting down with one of Lindsay's friends. Lindsay works with me at All Things Happy Hour. And this friend of ours has had a radical journey in his faith over the last decade. James, as he'll be known for this interview, shares how his story began with being raised in a home with a Hindu father and a mom who was a part of the underground Christian church. This is the foundation for his faith story, and so many times throughout the last 10 years, there are moments that can only be categorized as many miracles. You guys will not believe this story. Here is my conversation with James about how his last decade has looked from unbelieving to giving his whole life to God's purposes. Okay, James, welcome to the special edition of the Happy Hour called Your Last Decade, where I bring people onto the show to talk about what has happened in the last 10 years of their life. And Lindsay, who works with me, who a lot of our listeners know, introduced me to you. And she said, I have this friend who has this amazing story from the past 10 years. You're going to want to hear it. And she told me a little bit about it. And I am so excited to hear your story. So James, take us all the way back to 2010, 10 years ago. And what did your life look like then as far as your faith and your education, your family? And then you're going to walk us through all of the things that have gone on in your life in just a short amount of time of 10 years. So take us back to 2010.
Thanks so much. Yeah, in 2010, I was kind of not a believer in the Christian faith, but I was raised kind of as an underground Christian in Houston, Texas. And to explain that real quick, my mom grew up Christian and my dad Hindu in India. They met through arranged marriage. My dad was in grad school in the US, and he actually flew back in the middle of finals to marry my mom. It's the first time they met, and my mom had agreed to become Hindu as part of the wedding. She had grown up with a Christian background, but I don't think she was a believer. But when she moved to the US, she became a believer, and my dad was pretty hostile towards that. So she kept her faith a secret. She had, Bibles hidden in the attic upstairs in her house. She was not able to go to church, not allowed to go to church, not allowed to go to prayer meetings and things like that. And so she basically lived her faith on her own, tried to keep it a secret until my elder brother and I were in middle school. And that's when she shared the gospel with us in secret and told us not to tell our father because the risks that were involved. My dad was pretty hostile. So
wow.
My brother believed first, and I was kind of like, it was fun to play the secret agent games. Like, I won't tell my dad that, but that's cool. I was raised Hindu by my dad, and I didn't really go for Hinduism. I thought religion was like kind of a crux for weak people. And so that was just me being in middle school, conceited and stuff.
Was that the first time you heard the gospel was from your mom?
Yes, the first time I heard the gospel was from my mom. I remember the room that we were at her house when my mom sat in my sister was 6 years younger, so she was a baby then, and my mom couldn't have her in the room while she shared with us because she might pick up some words and say something on accident.
Wow. What a lot of I'm thinking as a mom.
My mom has some amazing faith.
Yes, yeah. What amazing faith. And to think like she wanted her children to know this faith as well, even in the hostile environment that you guys were living in.
Right. Yes. And that was a big part of it. My mom's mom, my grandmother, on her deathbed, I think her last words were me and my brother's names. And my mom had initially thought it was because, she missed us or something, but she realized it was we hadn't heard the gospel yet. And so it became really important to my mom that we know and we're raised in the faith. So she is the reason me and my brother and my sister now are everything that we are today. It's because of her faith and the price that she pays every day.
Wow.
Even to this day, she's still not allowed to go to church.
Wow. And her and your dad are still married?
Still married, still together, still in Houston, Texas.
Wow.
Yes.
So you grew, okay. Tell us more about growing, keep going with the story because that is great. We could sit here for a long time. I have so many questions.
Yes.
But keep going because at this point, 2010, your mom, you're raised here, but are you a believer in 2010?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I was kind of in this. I was a senior in high school in 2010. Was very strong in my atheism. I had some atheist friends, but I had a Christian background. I had compassion and love towards my mom because she was a nicer one of the parents. But I did grow up in a kind of contentious. It was a multi-faith Indian American home. I was confused. I think I was going through depression at the time for reasons. But I remember my mom. She'd have those hidden Bibles in the closet. When my dad would go to work, she would make us pray, or when he's in the shower, she'd have us pray. And I think it was just a very interesting upbringing because I never knew anyone that had a similar story at the time. Mm-hmm. So it was very isolating. And, and I wanted to learn about Christianity. We couldn't go to a church service and understand and get taught about it. We had to just go off the old Bibles that we had that were in my mom's language that I couldn't really understand. I remember booting up Microsoft Encarta in the middle of the night and searching Paul the Apostle and trying to get like a little bit of understanding of what the Christian faith was about. But it was a pretty sheltered upbringing with little discipleship and little access to resources because of all the situations. My dad would even track my mom's car where she went and see if she was praying in the home. And so it was just like we had to keep it completely secret. My dad was pretty against having Christianity in our family.
Was there ever a moment in those times where there was like a slip up, or there was someone accidentally said something, or your dad thought suspicion that y'all might have been reading the Bible? Did that ever happen in your home?
I think my dad was inherently suspicious because my mom didn't like going to the temple and he knew that she was raised Christian. And so he had some suspicion. But I do remember a couple incidents, and one particular comes to mind. And it was my dad had, he works in downtown Houston, about an hour away from, where we lived. And so he was on his way to work, and he doesn't usually, come back. It's a long commute. And my mom went to go take a shower, and he had just left the house early in the morning. And she had put on some Christian tracks, some music in our TV. And I remember being downstairs and my mom just running out of the shower in her towel and just telling me, turn the music off. The Holy Spirit just said, turn the music off. And as soon as I turned it off, my dad had pulled back into the driveway.
Oh my gosh.
And he had just walked in the door. And there were a lot of near misses like that. And I think it taught me that God had intentionally blinded my dad's eyes because it wasn't the right timing for him to know. But it also, looking back, and I didn't see this then, but looking back, like there were too many coincidences for it not to be God.
Wow.
So I felt like looking back, he was watching over us the entire time and raising us in that way for a reason.
Wow, gosh, 18 is such a hard time in your life anyways. You're trying to figure out who you are. You're going off to college potentially, and all of these decisions and kind of inward conflict that you have as an 18-year-old. And then compounded on top of that is your conflict of faith within your home. You're claiming to be atheist. Your mom is this underground Christian. Your dad is Hindu. I cannot even imagine what that felt like, James.
Yes. I don't know either. I think it was just happening, it wasn't, you didn't have like time or things to process through. And that's something that I guess in an Indian American kind of perspective, we don't process. We don't think about things. We just kind of do it, and we're expected to do things and to perform. So we don't really take a pause and think about, hey, like, why am I going through this? So there was a lot of isolation and depression coming out of that kind of culture that I had growing up, because I felt like I couldn't talk to my father about a lot of things. I conflicted with my mom on religion, so I didn't feel that close to her during high school. And then since I couldn't connect with a lot of my friends in school, I had like superficial friends and some, good friends, but it really was isolating. That's what led to my depression. And there was a series of events that happened. And like in 2011, about 2 weeks before going to UT in Austin, I found myself in a jail cell. And that's where I felt total isolation, where I could not help myself. And my atheism did not help me there. And that's when I prayed out to God, and he came before me and he asked me why I don't believe in him yet. And that's when I gave my life to Christ on my knees in a jail cell and became my savior. And 2 weeks later, I started at UT Austin. So it was just an intense upbringing.
Okay, that is all intense, and a lot of intense things just then. I'm about to start college, end up in a jail cell at the end of your rope. It's interesting. I've been met with a lot of skepticism from people of when people get find religion or find Jesus or become Christians in jail. People will often say, well, of course you are, you what else can you do? But I have met plenty of people like you and other people that I know that literally God takes you to the end of your rope. It's the end. There's nothing else you can do. And it's in those moments that you say, okay, I'm going to reach out. I'm going to trust. And that's what happened to you. So you become a Christian right before you go off to the University of Texas. Do you call your mom or what's going on here?
Well, yeah. So I had talked to my mom, and I think she and I just had a good experience, and she, got me baptized in secret. I remember sneaking out during high school. We had like a quote unquote doctor appointment, and she took me to her church where I was baptized. I think that was a big moment for me. And, I was going to walk this Christian life, but I didn't really know how in our context. I didn't know what discipleship was. I didn't know what church was. I didn't even know what a Sunday service was. I didn't know who Chris Tomlin was. We listened to 89.3 sometimes if we could in Houston. And then when I moved to Austin, I tried to live my freshman year. I wanted to, be of God. So I knew there was like worship and reading Bible, but I also had my whole party lifestyle. And so I did that for the first year. I think I visited the Stone once or twice. I remember, being out late on weekends. And then like at 3 or 4 in the morning, I'm like, oh shoot, I have to pray. And so I'd be praying after a night of partying or something. It was just really confusing for me. I didn't know. And I'd heard that there were Christian fellowships on campus, and I didn't really know what they were. This one girl that I grew up with in Houston, she also went to UT Austin. I remember sending a Facebook message to some people that I knew were Christian, including her. And I was like, dude, I remember sending this Facebook message out, and it literally said something like, do Christian people meet together to talk about God? Is that a thing? And I was brought into a Campus Crusade for Christ, to EPIC, which is the Asian American branch of Campus Crusade. And I met a bunch of other Christians there, and it was just the beginning of a wonderful journey of being discipled and getting taught Jesus' purposes for us and for the earth. And I took a course called Perspectives, which teaches us God's heart for the nations. And that was like, my heart was sold in 2012. And I remember, in that jail cell, I felt like Jesus was my savior, but now Jesus was becoming my Lord and guide. And I was very attached to that task. I was pre-med at the time, really academic focused, but I started to really buy into, what God's purpose was for me in my life. And I wanted to come away from being pre-med.
So this is your sophomore year in college or your freshman year still?
This is about the end of my freshman year. And then freshman year, I started going to that fellowship at the end of my freshman year. And throughout my sophomore years, when I was getting discipled and I was learning to live life as a Christian, I think I started leading my first small group.
That's amazing. I find it so interesting. You just said something that I think a lot of people who grew up in church can take for granted. You said that you sent your friend a Facebook message and said, hey, do Christians meet together to talk about God? And I remember, even as myself personally, I grew up in the church, but when I became a believer, it took me a while to like figure out like, what does it mean to live my life as a Christ follower? And so I love hearing you even say that, because it's an encouragement to us, you, myself, anyone that's listening that's a Christian, that when people come to know the Lord, like there's so much grace for them figuring out, how do I follow him? How do I make my ways his ways and my desires his desires? And so I love hearing you speak on that as a part of your journey of trying to go, how do I do this? Like, how do I actually do this?
There was one moment that I really felt that, be grateful moment when I lived in this dorm at UT called San Jacinto, so San Jack. And I remember there was like rides being organized to go to the Stone, and they'd pick us up in front. And the Bible that I had was this $1, like dollar store New Testament Bible. That's all I could, and growing up, like we had that one and I could hide it in my back pocket or put it in the bags. It wasn't like this big Bible and journal that we could carry around, because that was risky for us. And I remember walking through the halls of San Jack to the exit and holding that New Testament in my hand, like out in public. And I thought that was the strangest feeling I had. That was the first time I carried the word in public.
Wow.
And I think that moment was like, we are grateful to be in this place and I could walk in freedom. I think that being at UT was that for me. It's like, I could be a Christian here publicly, because I was 3 hours away from Houston in my dad's eyes, And so that really was like a grateful moment.
I love that, which is so interesting because, in America here, we would think of the scenario you just said as something that would happen on the other side of the world. And you're living what a lot of Christians face around the world. And so I'm imagining, I can see where your story might be heading, is that God has given you a heart for what it feels like to be a Christian, a persecuted Christian around the world.
Yes. And I agree. And it really did. I didn't know the Christian lingo or the Christian culture. I wasn't in a Christian bubble in that. So I could kind of see that sometimes when people would kind of talk about missions, like excitedly, I was like, why would you go on missions? I just kind of had this kind of cognitive dissonance where it didn't make sense to go overseas when there's like people that were struggling here in the U.S. So I watched my friends go on mission trips and short-term trips and long-term trips, and I could never go because of my dad. And that really did influence my faith. So kind of like, even if I could not go, I was going to do everything I can to be a Christian where I am, because that's the only place I can be right now.
Okay. So what I know next about your story is that your dad finds out you're a follower of Jesus. Tell us how that happened.
Yes. Well, so I had gone on a mission trip to New York with my church, and it wasn't really a mission trip. It was kind of like a volunteer service thing. I told my dad it was a conference. I was staying with friends. I tried to keep it vague but true without having to lie. But then I think one winter he asked too many questions about it, and he said, "Did you go as part of a church?" Because he had his suspicions, and it kind of blew up. It was the first time, and I remember, I was sitting in that living room in our house in Houston. We were visiting home. My mom was there, and my dad didn't know for sure about my mom. He didn't know at all about my brother and my little sister. And I think that was just a big turning point, because once he found out, it just caused a lot of personal problems in our family. It kind of exploded. He was really upset, and just a series of events happened, and I was forced to drop out of UT. My dad wanted me to stay home in Houston. He wanted me to enroll in a Hinduism heritage class, and he would bring me papers literally and tell me to sign that I should throw Jesus in the trash. And my mom told me not to ever sign anything like that, because Jesus said, "He who dies before man, I will die before the Father." So there was that, and I lost everything. I had really good friends, really good community at church. I couldn't carry my Bible around. I didn't have a car. I felt like I lost my education. And I remember sitting on my back porch then, and I remember Jesus asking me, if this is to be my life, if I had nothing else that I wanted, if I couldn't live that openly Christian life, am I okay with that? Is Jesus himself enough? Did I need all the extra things? And I just faced like a lot of theologically hard questions there. And as a young Christian, it was just hard. But then I feel like I trusted Jesus to do, he had been kind to me and brought my mom up. And so I felt like I could trust him more than I could trust my earthly father. And that's when Jesus became my Lord. He was more than just a savior. And I said, yes, Jesus, you are enough. You're more than all those other things. I don't need a car. I don't need an education. I can just sit here on this back porch and worship you, and that's all you need. And I think that was like the biggest turning point of, I think, my life, of when I wasn't just a saved or a believer. I became a follower of Jesus and his teachings.
At this point, were your siblings also followers of Jesus?
Yes, at this point, my brother and sister were also, but because of the precarious nature of our family, they could not, vocally support me or open up that they were Christian as well, because the way that my dad had treated us was whatever kind of fault that the kids would make, he would kind of take out on my mom. So she would suffer. So my brother and sister chose not to speak up, not because they were afraid, but because my mom would suffer the consequences. And when we were gone for college and she's home with my dad, we don't know what's going to happen. So for safety reasons, we didn't. We just kind of kept it to ourselves.
Wow. A lot of cultural things that are just hard for me personally to understand, because I haven't grown up in the culture that you have, and you were having to wrestle with all that at the same time as well.
Yes.
I know you eventually got back to Austin. How did you get back to Austin?
So my dad it was a miracle. I remember distinctly, my brother was also at UT Austin. He's a year older than I am. He came down to visit, and he was going back to Austin, and my mom, being a good Indian mom, she was cooking lots of food and wanting to send it back with him. But she was cooking a lot of food one day, and I was just kind of at home in my pajamas. And I was like, "Mom, why are you cooking so much food? It's just one person." And she was like, "I have faith that God's going to take you back too." And as my brother was in the car, loading the car to go back to Austin, and that weekend, my dad just came out randomly and said, "Fine, go back to Austin, but you're independent from me. You have 10 days to find a job. If you can't support yourself, then you're, going to live with me in Houston." And that was the ultimatum that he gave me. He says, "You have 10 days to find a job." So I just jumped in the car, went back to Austin, and I didn't really know what to do. I wasn't a student. I just went back to my old apartment where I couldn't even pay rent because I didn't have money, and my friends had to cover my rent for a while. But on day 10, I got a job at Chipotle on the drag on Guadalupe. I started out frying chips, and it was the beginning of an entirely new season for me. So yeah, that was like the process of my dad finding out, and then me getting out of that and becoming an independent person.
Wow,
financially, and I guess from my family.
Okay, guys, I know that you're loving James's story. It's crazy, isn't it? It's so unbelievably crazy how things have worked out. And just wait till you hear the rest. I want to stop real quick and give you two special little announcements. Number one, do you have a recommendation for a guest that should be on your last decade? Do you know someone, or maybe you, who something profound has happened in the last 10 years? Or are you a completely different person than you were in 2010? If so, email us. We want to know. podcast@jamieivey.com. Second thing I want to tell you, Happy Hour Live is in May 15th and 16th, and we would love to have you join us. This is a live event that we put on twice a year where I invite two ladies to join me on stage. We have a live interview. We have dinner. We have drinks. We have goodie bags. We have shopping downtown Austin, Texas. Friday night, my guests are Tasha Morrison and Shelly Giglio. Saturday night, my guests are Jennifer Allwood and Christy Wright. It literally is the most fun girls' night you'll ever have. Come join us. Check it out at jamieivey.com/events. Okay, here's the rest of my conversation with James. Wow. Did you feel relief that you were able to get out from your house and get back to Austin, even though it had, some circumstances that weren't the best compared to what you had been doing before?
Yes, for sure. I think that was like 2013 or 14. And I was helping coordinate a perspectives class. And I remember it was a Sunday night that I went back, and I had initially had to drop out of that perspectives class because I was stuck in Houston because of my situation. And it was just so amazing to just like drive back in Austin and jump back into that perspectives lesson and feel like, hey, I belong here. This is where I can grow and be free. And, just being able to read the word out in public again was just so much freedom. And it was, a breath of air. And it didn't matter what cost that came. If I didn't have an education or if I was working at Chipotle, it doesn't matter. I got to do that. And that, to me, was more important than being stuck at home. So no question, I was incredibly happy to be back in Austin.
Okay. So I know eventually you get back to school. You go back to University of Texas. How did you make that happen without your dad?
Well, it was hard. Tuition these days is not cheap.
Right.
But it was about a few weeks after I started at Chipotle, and I really think this is the Lord. But a few weeks after joining up at Chipotle, Chipotle announced this tuition reimbursement program. If you work there for a year full time and you continue working there, they'll reimburse a year's worth of tuition at any public university. And previously, it was only like Starbucks who did that, and it was like to a specific university online. But Chipotle said they'd do it to any public university. So UT qualified. And so I just, was working towards that. I was going to save up money, but I got really discouraged along the way and about like going back to school. And I thought about like, what's the point of that? I don't really need that. I'm really sold out for the gospel. I want to be a missionary. I did that training program at the Austin Stone for a year, the phase 1 and phase 2, and I was ready to go full time on support. And I was like, hey, like this is the next step for me. I'm independent. I can do this now because my dad doesn't have control over my life. I'm over 21. I also had this like passion that because I couldn't travel, because I couldn't go anywhere, I couldn't go on those mission trips like my friends. I volunteered with people that were in our neighborhood in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I got ahead of myself. And I volunteered with some sex trafficking organizations in the city, worked with refugees, the Refugee Services of Texas, and even through the Austin Stone, got to engage with some people, and I saw just how amazing these people were, and I wanted to figure out a way to help them, and worked with inner city kids. I also worked with Lindsay at Mission Possible in East Austin, and that was just like an incredible volunteer experience for me, and just being able to serve so many people in our own backyard, and for me to live out a Christian life and feel like I could do everything that Jesus asked me to do right here. And so I got a heart for them, and I didn't really have a lot of ambition. I was like, okay, if I work hard enough in Chipotle, I can become a kitchen manager and make a little bit more money, and then I could transition out into support maybe and do missions full time. And one of my mentors then had asked me to help him lead a mission trip to Africa, which was huge. And I said, okay, because we were training up people from churches not as big as the Stone or other big churches. It was kind of smaller Asian American churches in the city that needed help. They had a heart for missions, but they didn't have a sending capacity, so we're seeking to help them out. And I went to Africa. I told my dad it was just like a service trip, but I didn't go into too much detail. He didn't ask. I don't think at that point we didn't have that good communication. But I went, and it was textbook discipleship for me. It was just what you read about in perspectives, to read about nations, unreached people group in a hut by the river, sharing the gospel with someone who's never heard of Jesus before, working with persons of peace and through a translator. And it was just like surreal. I couldn't believe that I was actually doing this. I've been wanting to do this my entire Christian life, and I was finally doing it. And it felt like this is what I wanted to do. And then I kind of clearly heard the Lord speak over a Bible study that I was having in a hut. And he said, go home and go back to school. This is not what I have for you.
Wow.
And that was really hard.
So you're going back now, or you're going back. You're going to graduate from University of Texas, and then what? You're going to go to grad school.
Yes. Well, the grad school wasn't in the plan. I had no idea what to do at school. So on the flight back from Africa, I just processed my mentor and decided to, put my money that I was saving up to go and support and cancel support raising and just go back to school.
To finish your undergrad.
Yeah, to finish my undergrad. And it was hard because it was in 2015, I watched all my friends graduate. That was my class. And then I couldn't graduate until 2 years later in 2017. And I re-enrolled at UT. I had 2 years left to finish because I dropped out after sophomore year, but Chipotle only reimbursed 1 year. So I had to take 26 hours of class a semester.
Oh my gosh.
To graduate. And it was just an intense, brutal, because I was working full time at Chipotle too and taking class. Couldn't really go to church for almost a year. Had to hold Bible studies at Chipotle or my apartment to kind of keep the faith going. And that's kind of when I felt like God was kind of leading me towards the business sector. When I took a business foundations class at UT, and I really liked it. And my professor got me an internship there. And I didn't really want to go to med school. That wasn't my heart at that point. I really liked the tech industry. That's something that I had engaged a lot with in Austin, being in Austin. But I, again, going back to those refugees and those traffic victims and stuff, I really wanted to connect those people with the business world and the technology world. And that's kind of where God was leading me. I didn't really know what I was doing. I thought I'd apply to grad school to go to business school because of those passions. And I found that it was kind of coming easily to me. And I got rejected from UT actually. That was my first choice. I wanted to stay in Austin. And I was later got an email saying that I could go to Harvard. And that was just surreal for me.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the Lord. And I think that's, looking back, it was just God just taking me along this path that I had never known that I would go towards. I thought I wanted to go on missions full time at that stage of my life, but God had something else in mind.
So how is it when you have a conversation with your dad and you're telling him, I put myself through college, I've been working at Chipotle, now I'm going to grad school in Harvard. Like, is he proud of you? What's the relationship like with your father?
It's a little strained because I think I had proven myself to some capacity where I could, be independent financially and finish up school. But I also, if I wanted to go to grad school, that's also taking on more loans. And he's like, how are you going to pay this off? And a lot of financial questions and and there wasn't a lot of trust either there because I was like going off on mission trips without him knowing. And I think I didn't have a good trust relationship with him. And actually to put in my deposit to go to Harvard, my mom was the one who put that deposit in first. And because my dad didn't kind of believe in that, he said, I'm not touching this. You can go do whatever. So my brother was actually just moved to Boston. He was also in grad school in Boston that year. And so I moved the year after. I didn't know anyone else in Boston. I had joined the Antioch movement of churches before, and they had connected me to the local church in Boston. And I kind of got plugged in there. But it was just took 2 suitcases, moved to Cambridge near Boston, and I just started to go to grad school there. And I was like, hey, I'm determined to finish this without many loans. So I actually got a lot of scholarships and worked also full time while in grad school, just because I wanted to show my dad that I could do it, and it didn't have to be through loans. And so I graduated just last year in May, 2 years later, and got to do amazing things. Got to start a startup, got to travel a lot, got to see a lot. I saw people in the ICE detention facility. I saw racism and segregation in Boston. In my travels, I was made aware of my privilege, and I applied to this law school program at Oxford, hoping to, get a better understanding. And that was really when my dad came around, when he flew up to Boston for graduation. And the first day it's a little tense because we don't really know what a relationship is at that point. But the second day, he actually went to the Harvard Co-op store and bought my degree, like the framing.
Oh.
And he actually, he brought a video camera out and was videoing everything. And he just finally, you satisfy an Indian parent. It's not easy.
Right.
And I had needed money to put down the deposit. Oxford was they wanted all the money up front, and it was expensive, and the down payment was high. And so my dad actually at dinner that day after graduation, he said he would put down the deposit money for Oxford.
Wow.
And it was a huge moment because it was the first time since I had dropped out of UT that my dad had supported me financially.
That's unbelievable. So where are you right now, starting 2020, in January 2020? What's going on now?
Yes. So now I finished Oxford. I took a 6-month job at the UN. To finish that last year, I came back to Boston. And I started a house church through Antioch. So I'm leading a church plant in Cambridge for Antioch. Right now, I actually don't have a job because my UN job just expired. I'm hoping to start a new job the next couple of weeks. I have been trying to leverage my privilege, my giftings and talents to find justice through technology. Been working to the local church, really believe in that. Serving a lot in our church, trying to find solutions to racial reconciliation in our through the local church, and work for justice. And I think the words that really guide me in this journey today, and as I look for my next job and what's next for me, is Colossians 1:28 and 29 says, "Him we preach, warning every man and teaching every man in all wisdom, that we present every man perfect in Jesus. To this end I labor, striving according to his working, which works in me mightily." And I really hold to that because I know that that's my task, no matter what we have in this world or we don't have. And, we as Christians, we can wake up every day, and because we have salvation, we have nothing to gain. We've already been given everything. And for me, that gives me a lot of purpose that, we labor so that others can know Jesus and have that freedom that we have. And I want that to show in my career and in my ministry. So that's kind of where I am in 2020, seeing where things are going.
Wow. I'm telling you, I've talked to a handful of people about their last 10 years, and I might say that you have the most drastic 10 years of so far that I've talked to anyone about.
Yeah.
I mean, you told us, 10 years ago, your mom is a Christian hiding Bibles. She can't tell your dad. Your dad's Hindu. You're atheist, believing in nothing but wondering and looking around. And then God has just taken you on such a journey, and your faith is so evident. I'm so excited for what's in front of you. What do you wish for? What do you hope for in the next 10 years?
I think just continue growing my faith. And I think Revelation 7:9 is kind of like my lens that I'm looking through and seeing a great multitude which no one can number, of all nations, tribes, and peoples and tongues standing before the throne, just worshiping God. I want to see that happen. I want to see that eternity. I know it's going to happen, and I want to be part of it. And so whatever it is, whatever career shows up for me, whatever ministry opportunities show up, I've learned that God is faithful to finish what he started. He has a plan for us, and it's not only about us, it's about him and how we can co-labor with him to see his grand epic story play out, and understanding my role in that. And I've been humbled to know that I shouldn't try and author my own path. It's God is going to reveal to me what he has for me, and I just keep taking one step at a time, one day at a time. And I over the next 10 years, I hope to just be serving Jesus. I hope to be expanding his kingdom in ministry and career. I don't really know. I'd like to start a VC, or a venture capital firm, long term, and invest in Christian startups to kind of, I want to see reconciliation within the church. Boston's a really segregated city. It's hard to, not deal with that issue here. It's right in front of our eyes, and I want to see how the local church can be a solution to that. So that's kind of been what's on my mind lately. So we'll see where that goes. We'll have to check in 10 years.
Unbelievable. I will check in 10 years, but I have 3 more things to tell you. Number 1, I was just in Boston.
Oh, man.
I was there earlier in the year. My brother ran the Boston Marathon. Okay. And so that was fun, exploring your city. Great city. Yeah. Second, I flew through Boston and had me some clam chowder in the airport and loved it.
Good.
But it's so good. My last 2 questions. Number 1, does your dad know your siblings are believers now?
Yes, I think he knows that my brother he found my sister's journal once, so he found out that she was a believer. She's at Antioch Waco. She's a student at Baylor. And my brother is also here in Boston still. He just graduated grad school, but my brother's an engineer, just like my dad wanted him to be. And I think at this point, he can't really control any of us kids. What's hard now is just how he treats my mom at home. We don't expressly make it public that we're Christians, and we don't just rub it in his face because, whatever, he won't inflict it on us anymore because we're older. But my mom's still at home, and in our culture, my mom is, subservient to my dad, and my dad kind of rules over her life, and it's kind of hard to see that. And so if we do something wrong, she's going to suffer for it. So we don't push buttons, but we try and live this humble life, and we're praying. And my mom has a vision for his salvation, and I share that faith that, even 30 years later, that my dad will still come to Christ and he will become, prominent in his kingdom. So that's what we're still praying for.
My next question was, how fervent do you and your siblings and your mom pray for your dad's salvation?
Well, my mom is pretty intense. She's the kind of person who wakes up at 4 a.m. before my dad is up and is on her knees every day. And she's texting us to pray on a daily basis. So she is an amazing woman. Again, I would not be who I am today if it wasn't for the price that my mom has paid and still continues to pay. My brother and sister, I don't want to speak for them, but we're all figuring things out. My brother is a believer here. He goes to a different church, and my sister's, she's battling her own things, but she's a strong believer too, and trusting God. And we're all dealing with things. We've all had different relationships with our dad, and so I think one thing that I've learned is to have compassion for him. And I think growing up, it's easy to be angry at a father that was so hurtful and abusive. But I think from his perspective, he thought he was going to get a Hindu family and to raise us all together in one faith. And 4 of us kind of went the other direction. And I know that he must feel lonely and alone. And so for me, it's like our priority as a family is to be there for him no matter what. And to pray for him, to love him, to show him kindness. And it can be hard sometimes. But again, it's not about us. And if we can be kind to him and represent Christ well, then it's all vanity.
Wow. Well, your perspective and your gracefulness towards your father is evident. And, God's word is clear about how we speak the truth and in graciousness and respect. And so I am prayerful with you that your dad will come to know the Lord. What an amazing story you have, James. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time to share what God has done in your life in the past 10 years. It's basically unbelievable. I think you have the start of a very amazing book right here in front of you, because God has done so much in your world. Yes, so much in your world. And so thanks for sharing that with us.
Yes, of course. It was great. It was great for me to just do this too. And I haven't had the chance to really dive into the last decade. So it has been a blessing for me to just look back and see how far God has come, and knowing that there's a lot more that he's going to do. Thank you so much for having me.
You guys, I told you that James's last decade has been one of the most drastic transformation stories, from atheist to serving God with his work and everything he's doing. I felt like I could have talked to James for about 3 more hours about his life, because I feel like with every little moment that he told me something, there were like 17 layers underneath that. And can we just talk about the faith of his mom? Goodness gracious, the faith of his mom is such an encouragement and such an inspiration to all of us for what it looks like to truly walk by faith. Guys, thanks for listening to this special edition of The Happy Hour called Your Last Decade. Our hope in all of these shows is that you too can reflect on your last decade. Whether you were 23 years old 10 years ago or 65 or 12, I encourage you to look back and see what God has done in your life and where he has brought you. How have you persevered? How have you screwed up? What would you do differently? And what are you so very proud of? Also, looking back always causes me to look forward. What do you hope to see in your next decade? Today's show is edited by Chris with Podshaper and organized by Lindsay Sweeney. The music is developed for the show by Matt Graham, and the show notes are written by Aki Slockers. We'd love it if you enjoyed the show, if you'd share it with your friends. Word of mouth is the #1 way that people find out about our podcast. We thank you for doing that ahead of time. I'll see you next week on The Happy Hour for our regularly programmed show with my guest, Esther Fleece. And check back next week, because we've got another Your Last Decade.